afternoon, good evening, everybody. Welcome to another DxO webinar. I am your host, PhotoJoseph, and today's show is all about sports photography. We are going to be talking about enhancing sports photography. We're going to be taking some photos just kind of to the next level, just making them a little bit better, and then we're going to get a little bit more creative, a little bit more funky towards the end and have some fun with some photos. Before we get into it, let's just first of all do a quick little check in the chat room, make sure that y'all can hear and see me just fine. People saying sound and video working well. Excellent. Look at that. You guys already know what I'm going to ask. So thank you, Ray, for jumping in on that one and telling me all about it. For someone who has no sound, I see someone saying that turn up your volume. You should be able to see both me and my screen at this point. Let's also make sure that you are seeing both me and my screen and show me. Oh, nope. There we go. Now let's show the main screen. There we go. Now we're showing the screen. That's even better. And so now you should be seeing both. So once again, I'm your host, PhotoJoseph. If you have not had a webinar with me before, first of all, welcome. Thank you. Good to see you here. Now you see my screen. Excellent. Good to see you all today. A good bunch of you in here. The format of my webinar is that I will be jumping in and out of questions throughout the whole thing. So whenever there's a natural pause or break or I'm waiting for something to happen, I will jump over and try to address any questions that have come up. So if you have questions at any time, drop them into the questions area where you've just been chatting to me, and then I will be able to address them, or at least I will certainly try to. If you don't get a question answered today, either because I missed it or I simply don't know the answer, feel free to hit me up on social media and ask, and I will dig into that for you. The best way to reach me is on Twitter. I'm going to right now send to you links to both my Twitter account and to YouTube. I, of course, would love to see you over on my YouTube channel as well. If you click on both those links, hit the subscribe or follow or whatever button, that would be fantastic. And if you do have any questions, Twitter is definitely the best place to hit me up. You can find me as PhotoJoseph, though, absolutely everywhere on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and so on. So again, if you don't get your questions answered, feel free to hit me up there afterwards. Also, you will be getting a copy of this webinar in your inbox about 24 hours after it ends. You'll get a copy of the video. So if you miss anything here or you just want to watch it again, then you will have that opportunity. I do tend to move quickly. So once again, if I move too fast and you miss something, that's your chance to go back and see it. And I guess that's about it. So why don't we just get this thing started, shall we? All right. So again, as I said, we're going to be doing some basic enhancement, and then we're going to get into some creative. And kind of a fun little background bit here. When I first got this topic to do, I thought, okay, well, I'm going to have to kind of struggle to find some sports pictures because I don't do sports photography. I'm not a sports photographer. I have been shooting for a very long time. I have shot a lot of different things, but sports isn't really my thing. And as soon as I started digging into my archive, though, I realized I actually have shot quite a bit of sports just for one reason or another. So we're going to be looking today at surfing photography. I've kind of one photo from each category here, but basketball, this is college basketball, just indoors in a high school gym, so nothing spectacular, followed up by actual Beijing Olympics basketball. I was there for a thing and I was able to shoot one of the games, which was kind of cool. Looks like I had a pretty decent seat there, so that was fun. A little bit of race car action here, a little bit of skateboarding, a little bit of snowboarding, and some cycling. So we got a pretty good variety here. It's ranging from kind of pro sports to just I guess the college basketball would be the most amateur level sport thing that I shot. I considered getting some pictures of kids playing on the soccer field, but then I thought, kids on the internet, we're just not going to go there. But anything that I teach you today, anything you learn today can certainly be applied to any type of photo, no matter what you're shooting. So one of the key things starting with sports photography is the picture's got to be pretty good to start with. I mean, to be fair, that kind of goes with anything, right? Garbage in, garbage out. If you take a really rubbish photo, you're not going to suddenly make it amazing because you run some filters on it. Those days are no longer here. So, you can't just take a picture of like your breakfast cereal and put a filter on Instagram and everybody goes crazy. Those days are past us. But if you do have a good photo, then there is certainly always room for improvement. And when it comes to sports photography, I think there's less room to get creative than in a lot of other types, just because we have a certain expectation when we're looking at a sports photo that it is simply a clean, sharp, well-focused, nicely composed photo. We're not looking for fancy filters and crazy colors and all kinds of weird stuff like that. We just want a photo that tells the story. So again, that's how we're going to start this off. We're going to focus on enhancing photos, not trying to make them fun and crazy and wild, but just making them better. And then at the end, we're going to get a little bit crazy because, you got to have some fun, right? So, all right, with all that said, we're going to start with this one here. This is, believe it or not, I shot this out of a helicopter. pilot was crazy, hovering like 30 feet off the deck, shooting with a long lens. This is with a 400mm lens if memory serves. Let's take a look at the metadata on this file. Yep, 400mm lens. This is on a Canon 1DS Mark III. This is shot in 2007, so 12 years ago. And it was, oh, and it's JPEG. That was the other thing I wanted to tell you. This is a JPEG. I was not shooting RAW because, you know, these days you can shoot 12 frames per second RAW and it's no problem. Back then, if I was shooting RAW, I'd only get a few frames in and the buffer would fill up. So I was shooting JPEG. So I think it's a really fun image to start with, just to show that even with a JPEG, you can still do stuff to it. You're not, granted, not as much as if it was a RAW file, but you can still work with it. It's still a totally viable file. So this is the photo. This is the total. Let's make sure. Hit reset. Yep, that is the total original straight out of camera image. And, you know, it's fine, right? It's not the sharpest photo in the world. If we zoom in real close on him, you see it's just a little bit soft, but hey, I was in a helicopter. He was moving. What are you going to do? You know, but it's still a cool photo, great composition, fun shot. But let's see if we can make it a little bit better. As any of you who have followed me before know, or watched one of these know, I generally like to start with just the auto button, hit the auto enhance button and see what happens out of it, what happens with that, and then take it from there. Now, we are working in Lightroom Classic today. If you've been watching any of my other previous webinars, you know that I bounce around. Sometimes I'm in Lightroom, sometimes I'm in PhotoLab, sometimes I'm just straight in Photoshop. It doesn't really matter a whole lot because we are focusing on the Nik collection, on the Nik plugins, and we're going to be jumping in there, but you need a host. Right, the Nik collection are plugins. They are technically, they do work as standalone apps. You can drag and drop an image onto the app icon to open it. The Nik plugins don't actually have an open dialog. If you just double click it, it launches the app. There is no interface to get to a photo, but you can open one by drag and dropping on it. So what that tells us is that we can use it pretty much anywhere we want to. But the Nik plugins do not handle raw files. You have to send either a JPEG or a TIFF file to them. So that is what the host app would do, like Lightroom or Photoshop or even PhotoLab. They convert the image into a TIFF file and send it off to the plugin. However, if you're using Photoshop, then you do have the option of using a smart object, or having the file be a smart object, which means, and you'll see this, we will get to this towards the end of today's presentation, which means that you have not only access to the raw file while even after you've sent it to the plugin, but you have access to the plugin after you've worked on it, meaning you can go back in and re-edit it, which is pretty significant. So there's a lot of different reasons to use different apps, but that's one of the biggies for using Photoshop. Now, if you're not a Photoshop or Lightroom user, if you're not an Adobe subscriber, then of course Nik Collection version 2, which is what we're looking at today, includes DxO's PhotoLab. And PhotoLab is a fantastic host. It's a fantastic raw editor. I've used that for previous demos. Today, however, I'm going to be using Lightroom. So with all that said, let me just take a quick look at the Q&A before I jump into the first part of this demo, and we will go. Alrighty, Michael Dow asking, what picture style do you normally use for sports when shooting JPEG? Okay, so I no longer shoot JPEG. My history, and I'll go do this very briefly, my history used to be that I always shot RAW plus JPEG because I liked having the out-of-camera JPEG for certain parts of my workflow. That might have been for just a quick preview in the computer. It might have been for sharing on social media, extracting the JPEG from the camera and over to your phone and sending it. But now, because my phone can handle raw files, I can replicate the in-camera look in the raw file in Lightroom. So if I'm in Lightroom, I can choose to show me this file in the camera's version of Vivid or Portrait or whatever. I no longer shoot JPEG. Now, back in the day, back here, gosh, I don't remember what color profile this was. It was probably just a natural or neutral. I'm not sure that it even shows this here. I'm not seeing that information in here, but this was probably just a pretty straight up one. If I am shooting JPEG for any reason, I'm probably going for something like a Vivid style because I like the punchy, poppy colors. But for the most part, I am shooting RAW these days, so all exclusively instead of RAW plus JPEG. Okay, so back to this photo. So as I said, I always start with auto, and auto works even on JPEG files. Obviously, it's not going to do as much, but it will do something. So I'm in the develop module. I click on the auto button, and okay, it's taken the highlights in the water and pulled them down a little bit. It looks like maybe a little bit less bright on him. Let's just undo that real quick, and so it's a little bit less bright on him, a little bit less bright on the water there. So again, that auto button just knocks it down a bunch, takes the edge off, if you will. Okay, cool. Now let's see what we can do with this thing. So I'm going to take this photo, right click on it and choose edit in, and I'm going to send this off to Color Efex Pro 4. That is going to be where I'm going to start today. I'm going to edit a copy with the Lightroom adjustments because I want the adjustments that I just applied. I want that already added to the file. So I'll click edit, and we're going to take this into Color Efex Pro and see what we can do. Now, when you first launch the filter, it is likely going to load up the last filter that was applied. Looks like tonal contrast was the last one applied. You will also see a bunch of presets on the left, and let's just start with a little tour of Color Efex Pro in the event you have never been in this tool before. Here's a tour. So you have, on the left-hand side, you have two columns to look at. You've got your recipes column, which are another way of saying presets. And then above that, you have your filter library, which is each individual filter. The way Color Efex Pro works, and every Nik plugin works just a little bit differently just because of the nature of the plugin. The way that Color Efex Pro works is you have all these different filters here that can be stacked on top of each other. So right now there's tonal contrast. If I go over here and I click on, say, cross-processing, it has replaced tonal contrast with cross-processing. So I see that there. If I go down and I click on high key, it now has replaced that last one with high key. So I'm replacing the filter every time I click on a new one. If I want to add a filter, I want to add a second filter to this, then I first have to click on this button here that says add filter. When you click on that, it adds an empty filter into it. And now when I go and I add something else, it has now added that filter on top of the other one. So now I have high key and then duplex. And very importantly, you can actually rearrange these. So I can simply grab one and rearrange it, put one on the top or on the bottom, and that makes a big difference. The easiest explanation of why it makes a big difference is to talk about using a black and white filter. Imagine, if you will, that I have a black and white filter, and then beneath that I have a color tint filter. So I've taken my black and white filter and now I've made it red. If you think about the image pipeline, the image goes through the black and white filter. The black and white filter spits out a black and white image. The next filter, the color tinting filter, grabs that and adds the red tint onto it. So now I have a monochromatic filter, a monochromatic photo that's red on it. If I take those filters and I rearrange them, I add the red first. Now I've got a color photo that had a red filter applied to it, which is then passed on to the black and white filter. So all that's being spit out is black and white. So rearranging those filters can have a huge impact. Sometimes it makes almost no difference. You look at it and you're going, well, I don't see a difference. That's fine. It just didn't really matter for that particular look. But in some cases, it makes a huge difference. And so that's a very important thing to understand about the filters. They work on a pipeline where the image comes in the top, it hits this filter, gets handed off to the next filter, handed off to the next, and so on until you get the final image. Now I just showed you how to add additional filters, and like I said, you can just keep adding them. You can add a whole bunch of these things to it. But over here on the left-hand side, if we get out of the filter library and look at the recipes, these presets are combinations of filters already assembled for us. So like this is tonal contrast plus detail expectors plus reflective, blah, blah, blah. You have all these different filters that are added. And the cool thing about the presets is you see what it's going to look like over here on the left-hand side. So in this case, again, I'm not looking for something crazy. I don't want to make this look all weird and funky and strange colored. I'm not looking for some kind of weird sepia thing. I just want to make it look a little bit better. And there's a really great preset in Color Efex Pro that is just the kind of magic, make it look better button. And that is this one here called Clarity Bump. I hit Clarity Bump and it has added three things. A tonal contrast, so it's adding contrast, but not in a very generic broad sense. It's in a very subtle and precise sense. And in fact, you can open this up and you can control the contrast of the highlights, midtones, and shadows individually, adjust saturation if you need, and so on. Then there's a brilliance and warmth, which is effectively a saturation slider, which by default hasn't really done anything. It's a little bit of perceptual saturation added, but that's it. And then a little general contrast on top of that. So there's not much, right? It's very subtle. But look, if I just do a compare, a before and after, as I hold down the compare button, it does a before and after on there, and we see a very nice pop to the image. It has brightened it up. It has added some nice detail into the water spray. Look at the spray on the left and right side there as I go back and forth. It really makes that pop out, and it is just a brighter, poppier, nicer image. And that's it, right? That's it. It's just a simple little filter collection that does something nice to almost every image. And this is actually going to be the starting point for a few other photos as well. In this case, that's all I'm going to do. I'm not looking to make this crazy and weird. Just want to make it a little bit better. Hit save, and away we go. Let's see what's going on over in the chat room real quick. Millie Johnson, how do you know what order to put the filters in then? That is a great question. The order is largely a creative decision. Sometimes it's just kind of a logical decision, like let's say, okay, well, like the black and white example, logical, right? If you want to have a red tinted black and white photo, then you have to put the black and white first, you put it last, and the whole thing is black and white. Pretty obvious. If you have a, let's say a vignette, you put a heavy vignette over the image, but then after that you put a big levels adjustment and you change the exposure. Well, now you've just changed the exposure of the vignette, and it's not what you wanted. You want the vignette after that. So a lot of times it's just logical, but other times it is purely creative, and you can drag them around and change the order and see what you like. And then, like I said, sometimes it just doesn't matter. It just really depends on the image. There's no easy answer to how you know, other than the cases where it's obvious because one effect is going to cancel out another, so you got to swap them around. But that's about the best answer that I have for you. Okay, let's move on to the next photo. The next photo is going to be this one, the college basketball. So we got a few things going on here. The photo's a little bit crooked. I've got this ref, I guess, in there that's kind of distracting me. It could be kind of a cool part of the story, but let's just say that like this is my daughter and I want a great photo of her. I don't really care about the ref. I just want to focus on her. So I'm probably going to crop her out. And if I look closely on here, we'll see that there's quite a lot of noise. It was shot very high ISO. It's low light. This is a high school gym, not like shooting at the Olympics where you got tons of light. So this photo definitely needs some help. And then I just want to do some general enhancement to it. So the part of the corrective stuff I'm actually going to do just straight up in Lightroom. I'll start with noise reduction because this is pretty bad. So we'll zoom into that. I will scroll down to detail. Here we go. Noise reduction. Now there's always, in every raw processor, there's always a general level of noise reduction that is applied. It's just kind of part of the raw process, but then there's always additional noise reduction that you can do. This photo clearly needs it, so I'm just gonna take this up a little bit. And I'm not gonna go crazy. If I crank this all the way up, it's like, ooh, look, all the noise is gone. But yes, it's also this mushy, plasticky photo that's definitely not attractive. So I'm gonna take it down a little bit. And of course, if you were using PhotoLab for this, then you have great noise reduction in there. If you're using PhotoLab, I forget, not Prime. If you're using the PhotoLab version that is kind of the upgraded version from what comes with the Nik collection, then you have Prime noise reduction, which is a really, really high grade noise reduction. So a photo like this, if I was using that software, I would definitely send it through it, but today we're just using Lightroom. So I got to find the balance of noise reduction where it looks cleaner. I'm not trying to make it look like it was shot at 100 ISO on full daylight. I'm trying to make it look cleaner and not lose any details. So I'm going to go kind of right around there. Looks pretty good. And if I, compare that, oops, that's the wrong button. If I compare that, there we go. There's the original. You see a lot more noise on there, and there's the enhanced one. So definitely a big change in there. Okay, so that's step one. Zoom back out of there. I think cropping this is in order. Like I said, I want to get rid of the ref in there, so I'm going to crop it. I am very much a proponent of you crop to whatever aspect ratio works for you. If you are going online, online doesn't care what aspect ratio it is. If you're printing, well, sure, there are standard print sizes, but you can always trim off the white borders if it doesn't come in a standard size, or most printers will actually deliver you whatever aspect ratio you want. You might have to pay for it. Let's say you're printing an 8x8 inch print. You might have to pay for an 8x10 inch piece of paper, but whatever. You can cut the edges off and you have a square or slightly off square, whatever you like. The exception would be perhaps if you're posting on Instagram and you want to maximize the screen real estate on Instagram, then you're going to go for a 5:4 crop, right? Like, so let's just say that I did want to put this on Instagram. So I'd go for a 5:4 crop. Let's rotate that aspect ratio. Rotate that aspect ratio. I'd actually never do that in here. I totally forgot how to rotate the aspect ratio. Oh, that's so silly. Well, let's just pretend that I rotated the aspect ratio. I would do that for a 4:5 crop. But in this case, I don't care. So I'm just going to do a custom, and I'm going to crop this however I want, and I'm going to do it like right about so. That's just how I've decided to crop it. Now, often for me, when I'm looking at a photo like this, I look at my horizon lines, and I'm going to go, ooh, I want to straighten the horizon lines. I generally like my images to have straight horizons or straight verticals. Probably verticals are a bit more important, but obviously it depends on the image. And so I look at this photo and I go, actually, maybe it's kind of cool being at an angle there because it shows a bit more movement. It's kind of this like, ooh, dynamic, grab the picture quickly kind of a thing. So it helps to tell the story. But I'm going to try it. I'm going to try straightening it because I always like to experiment and just see what looks better. Sometimes and sometimes you only think you know. It can't hurt to try, right? So let's go back into the straightening, grab the straightening tool, and I'm just going to drag a line straight across the horizon there, the background, straighten that out. And in that case, I actually go, you know what? I actually do like it better straightened. Not because I like the line straight, but because the player is now leaning more. Now there's a little bit more action on her. So I'm feeling like there's more action in the shot than there was. So I just went through that exercise simply to point out that sometimes the seemingly obvious may not be the right answer. So try things. Here by straightening it, I actually added action when I thought it was going to take it away. And I like that. Okay, so I've got it cropped, I've got it straightened, I've got some noise reduction. Let's take this into Color Effects Pro. So right click, edit in Color Effects Pro, and let's see what it does. I'll edit with Lightroom, of course, and we'll do some enhancements in here. Back into the questions real quick. Michael Dow, is it possible to batch process multiple photos using the Clarity Bump recipe? Absolutely, but you have to be using Photoshop to do that. In Photoshop, you build an action, you start recording an action, you jump into Color Effects Pro or whatever you want, click on the preset, and hit OK, and then save that action, and then you can batch apply that action to other photos. That's the way you do batching. Philip Barker would love explanation of the control points. Oh, we'll be getting there. Yep, we'll be getting there. No worries. Or actually, we're going to get there into this image. Last one for now. Linda says, with using in Lightroom, do you recommend editing only as far as auto will take you before using the plugins? No, not at all. Okay, so a bit more of an expansion on editing the image before you go to the plugins. What I always want to do is ensure that I'm sending the best quality image possible to the plugin. So if the image is generally fine exposed, we have no clipped highlights or shadows, everything's in range, then it's more of a creative decision. Maybe I want to lift the shadows a little or pull the highlights down a little. It's just creative. But if you have an image that's starting with a raw image, of course, where the highlights or shadows are blown out or clipped, you want to recover those before you send it off to the plugin. Now, to be fair, if you are sending off a 16-bit TIFF file, the highlight data is still there. You can still recover it in the plugin, but it's going to take more effort. I would prefer to, from the raw processor, whether we're talking PhotoLab or Lightroom or Photoshop or whatever, I would prefer to recover my highlights and shadows there and then send that off to the plugin. Even if my plan is to crush the blacks, let's say I've got a high contrast image and I'm gonna smash the contrast and the shadows in there. Even if my decision is going to be to do that, I'm probably still going to pull the shadow detail up, assuming it's there, right? I don't want to just go crazy and pull in a whole bunch of noise. But if there's detail there, I'm probably going to pull it up so that when I am editing that filter in the plugin, I can make the decision then, as opposed to being forced into that decision at that stage because I made what I thought was the right decision beforehand. So I just want to send off the most data, most accurate data possible. And sometimes that means sending off a fairly flat image, a photo that doesn't have a lot of contrast, but it does have all the detail in it. So we're not going to really explore that workflow today because all of these photos are generally well exposed to start with, but in other shows that I've done, and I'm sure that I will do in the future, I will be exploring that idea a little bit more of taking a photo that's got blown highlights or lost shadows and lifting them, pulling them back into range, and then sending it off. Great question. Thank you very much for asking that. Okay, we're back into the plugin. Here we are back in Color Effects Pro. Again, reduced noise, cropped, rotated, got the shot ready to go. I'm going to start once again with Clarity Bump because I know it's generally awesome. I hit that and a little compare here, a little before and after, and sure enough, it's not much, but it's nice, right? It's a little bit of contrast, a little brightening. I dig it. I like the look of this. Okay, so that's good. Let's do a little bit more to it though. I want to, let's say, vignette this a little bit. One of the problems, and I put that in air quotes because it's not really a problem, but one of the things when you crop a photo is you lose any of the natural vignetting that happened in the lens. Now, I get that sometimes there's vignetting in the lens that you want to remove, and so you will go to lengths to get rid of any vignetting that happened in the lens. However, my personal feeling on it is, for the most part, that natural vignetting in the lens looks good. I like having a little bit darker outer edge. Not a lot, I'm not trying to go crazy here, but I like having a little bit darker outer edge. And so if I've cropped past that, as I have here, I'm going to add a little bit of that back in. And I don't want to go crazy, I'm not going to go nuts on the vignetting, but I'm going to add a little bit back in. So I'm going to click on Add Filter and then go down here and look for vignetting, and there's 3 of them in here. There's a vignette filter, which is a very kind of heavy-handed one. There's a blur vignette, which slightly blurs the edges, and then there's a lens vignette, which is going to be your more natural vignetting. So that's one that I'm going to add. I hit lens vignette, and it starts off very heavy, way too heavy. I'm going to take the amount on that and dial it up. You'll see it's down to negative right now. If I go to 0 on there, there is no vignetting. If I go positive, it brightens the outer edge. If I go negative, it darkens the outer edge. And incidentally, that positive is there to compensate. So if you have vignetting that you're trying to get rid of, This will take care of that, but I'm trying to add it back in. So I'm just gonna, just a little bit, not much, just a tiny little bit in there. And to me, it helps just to focus the attention back towards the center of the image. That's really all that is. So very, very subtle look. Looking at the photo, this player, because they're wearing white, especially, this player is quite bright. I mean, they're both quite bright, but she's actually even a little bit brighter. Right on her rump there, it's even brighter, and it's a bit distracting. I want the focus to be on her, but I don't want to crop this player out. I don't want it to look like, oh, look, she's running down the court without any, anybody in her way. No, I want to focus on her, but not crop this player out. So I just realized something real quick. I'm going to increase my mouse size, make this a little bit easier to see. I always forget to do that right before the show starts. Here we go. There we go. Make that a little bit easier to see. Okay. So I don't want to crop her out, but I do want to darken her a little bit. So let's add another filter, and I'm going to go for one called Levels and Curves. There it is. And it's kind of odd. It's called Levels and Curves when it really is just curves, but whatever. It is the Curves filter, and because I have control points, so someone who asked about control points, we're going to use those for the first time here. Because I have control points, I'm not limited to adding this filter to the entire image in here. Now my goal is to darken her a little bit. If I pull down the mids on here, we'll see that the mids get darker, but the brightest spot on her is still really bright. So that's actually not what I want on there. So maybe I go in here and I try to get really careful about kind of just darkening the brightest parts of the image, but it's like, that's not really, nope, that's not going to do it either. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab the out point. This is the kind of edge of white, and just pull it down. Just make the whole thing darker. Remember, I can add a control point to isolate this. So I'm just going to darken the image like so. And now I'm going to make sure that this gets applied only to her, or more specifically, I'm going to protect her from this filter. So now when you're working with control points, you have two different ways to approach it. You can approach the control point as I'm going to add the effect to this specific area, or I'm going to take the effect away from this specific area, in effect protecting that area. I want to protect my main player from the effect that I've just done. So I'm going to use a negative control point. I grab the negative control point and I'll start by putting it on her shirt, and right away we can see that she has gotten brighter. Not everywhere, but at least her shirt has gotten brighter. And if you're not familiar with control points yet, allow me to have some water, and then allow me to tell you about that. So control points are effectively masks that are generated in real time based off of the luminance and the chrominance of the image, the area of the image that you've clicked on. That means the brightness values and the color values of the area that you've clicked on. You don't have to draw in a radial mask or a linear gradient mask. You don't have to go in with brushes. The control point isolates the effect, or blocks the effect in this case, to a region based off of the brightness and the color values of where you clicked on. And to see exactly what is being affected or is not being affected, we have a mask view. So I open this up and you'll see here it says control point. There's the one that I've added. And then right here I've got this little tiny icon that if I click on, puts me into mask view. And now I can see black is, in this case, what is protected, and white is where the effect is going to be applied. And it has clearly grabbed her shirt, but not the rest of her. So what I want to do is add another control point to her face, maybe to the ball, maybe to her shorts, just to kind of expand this out and protect more of that player while allowing the rest of the scene to go dark. The easiest way I find to do that, well, first of all, you can make these bigger, but as I do that, I get more of her shirt because obviously her uniform is the same color as hers, so that's not good. So let's bring that back down a little bit. The way that I will most often do this is by option dragging the control point. Sometimes, like this control point is just one slider, it's a size, and then you do have this opacity slider to control how much of that effect is being let through. Sometimes you have lots of different controls on here, and you don't want to have to recreate all those controls. So as a force of habit, whenever I'm doing this, I almost always just replicate the existing control point and drag it around. So the way I would do that is hold down the option key, and you see the cursor changes to a little arrow with a plus, and then I just drag this around. So let's add it onto her jersey there, onto her face, maybe up there. Let's get it onto her hair a little bit, down there, and that's probably good enough. Now that background got affected pretty heavily as well, but I think it's going to be okay because it's kind of vignette out from her, and sure enough, that's looking pretty good. And if I take this brightness slider now and I adjust this more dramatically, you can see where she's protected. Now if I go crazy on this, we start to see some of the spots, and so we'd have to be a little bit more careful. But for this effect, because I'm only trying to darken a little bit, I'm okay with that. I think it's fine just the way it is. Now, remember we talked about the order earlier, and in this case, I added vignette, and then I added levels and curves, which means I am affecting the vignette. You can see like over here in her hand, that has gotten brighter where it was vignetted down earlier. So I'm going to rearrange this, take the levels and curves, move it before the vignette, and now that vignette has returned over that arm there, the legs here, and all around it. So overall, that has worked out a little bit better. If I want to take the control points a little bit farther, maybe I want to not only protect this player, but actually brighten her a little bit, I can add another one of these same filters, another levels and curves. I can't simultaneously use this same one to both brighten and darken, but I can add another filter, add another levels and curves. There we go. So now I've got two of the same one. And in this case, we'll also put this before the vignette. And in this case, I'm going to brighten just her. So we'll brighten this up, and I'll go ahead and take a control point. And it's really her face that I'm concerned with. So let's put that on her face, maybe a little bit on her jersey there. And now I've got a little bit of brightening, just a little bit, not much, but just a little bit of brightening on her. So if I do a before and after here, there's the original flatter image, and there's the enhanced one. We're seeing a little bit of vignetting, a little contrast enhancement, a little bit more focus on her, and I'm good with that. That's the image that I want to create. So I'll go ahead and hit save, take us back into Lightroom, and jump over to the questions again. Let's see here. Close that. Oh, people telling me to rotate the aspect ratio in Lightroom, just hit the X key. Thank you. I use Lightroom CC mostly these days, and some of those things have changed. Anyway, Jory saying, would you crop basketball pics tighter so a stray forearm and hand isn't cut off? Possibly, but I didn't want to cut her. I didn't want to cut her partially, and I can't crop out this hand without cutting off part of her. And actually, I don't mind that, right? It's one of those things that when you're looking at the photo closely, you see more of the story. You see that there is someone else involved. They're out of frame, but they're in there and they're putting their hand on her. And you don't know if it's the ref or another player or what. So it's a little bit of drama. This is obviously very much just a creative decision at this point. But for my money, let me go back to the original photo here that that I cropped. I feel like if I cropped, back to the crop tool, there we go. If I cropped her, oops, well, that was genius. Come on, you. There we go. If I crop the hand out, then it would be like that, and I really don't like. So I chose to leave that in. And again, maybe your decision is to leave the ref in as well. Totally up to you. That's just how I chose to do it. Not saying I'm right. It's just the way I did it. That's the thing with cropping. There is no right and wrong. I mean, okay, sometimes there's wrong, but for the most part, it's fine. Jorge asking, is there a cropping capability in any of the Nik Collection apps? No. The cropping always happens outside of the app. You don't crop within the plugins themselves. Somebody said they lost audio. Hopefully that's not, you're not the only one. Hopefully you are the only one. As everybody, yeah, this the only one saying they lost audio. So hopefully the audio came back for whoever that was, for you, Kathleen. Okay, let's move on. Next photo, what was next? Next photo is this basketball one. All right, so now we've got a better lit photo to start with. Obviously, this was the Olympics, so, you know, probably some pretty good lighting there. Not the longest lens, didn't have the shallowest depth of field lens. In fact, let's just see what this was. This was library image. Give me the metadata. There it is. This was shot with a same camera, the Canon 1DS Mark III, 70 to 200. It's probably the f4. Yep, the f4. So not super shallow depth of field. Probably shot wide open, but that's pretty far away from the subject. So you know we don't have a whole lot of separation for f4.5. So we don't have a lot of separation between the player and the background there. So we need to fix that. Now, because of her dark skin tone, she is kind of blending into the background a bit too much. And there's a stage of looking, oops, come back here. There's a stage of looking at this and thinking, oh, she pops out fine, right? Her skin colors, the background skin color, background colors, they totally separate, and that's fine. But a really important thing to consider when you're looking at an image and how well one element pops out against the other isn't just color, but it's the tonal value. And when you're looking at a color image, it's hard to remove the color from your brain and just look at the tonal value of it. So a great way to do that, just temporarily, is to simply convert the picture to black and white. So in Lightroom, I'm just going to go over here and click the black and white button. And when I do that, we see that she really kind of blends into the background there, and that's not good. There's just not enough separation between them. So I really want to do something to make sure that she is standing out a bit more. And so that is going to involve playing with the levels of the background and the foreground, in this case her, and making sure that she's separated out quite a bit more than she is. So this is just a really good way to test it. If you're looking at an image and you're not sure how well that image really pops, go black and white, just temporarily. Go black and white just to remove the color information from the scene and look at it and go, okay, yeah, she does kind of blend into the background. That's not good. All right, let's fix that. Okay, go back to color. Once again, I'll do an auto enhance on this because I want to. There we go. Let's brighten everything up a little bit. Still, by black and white, it's actually a little bit better now, but still not good enough. So, so let's fix this. Yeah, we're just going to take this into, right click on this and edit this in Color Effects Pro. All right, we're going to start with the same clarity bump preset because it just works. So we'll click on that preset as soon as this loads up here and go down to the recipes. So I should have gone to a question now, shouldn't I? But too late now. All right, back down to the recipes, click on clarity bump, and right there, compare before and after. It's just, again, just a little bit better, not better enough, but it is a little bit better. Okay, so what am I gonna do with that background there? Now, I'm looking at two different things that I can do in there. We talked about the values, the tonal values. So I really do need to play with the exposure there, but it is a color photo. And so the color does play into that a little bit as well. So the first thing I wanna do is actually desaturate the background a little bit. I'm just going to take that blue and make it a little bit less rich, a little bit less poppy. So to do that, I will add another filter and I will add the brilliance and warmth filter to this. I want to isolate this to the blue, right? Well, let's just start by taking the saturation down a little bit. So let's just take the whole thing down. Not crazy, I'm not trying to make it black and white. Let's not get carried away here. But I just want to take some of that real brightness out of that. But I only want to affect the blue. So if I toggle this on and off, you can see the difference in there. So there's with it off and there's with it on. Obviously her skin tones have been desaturated as well, which is not what I want to have happen. So I'm going to use a control point. In this case, I'll use a positive control point, a plus point, because that will say apply the effect only to this area as opposed to the negative that says protect this area. So I'll grab that. I'm going to click on, there's two different ranges of blue in here. We got the dark blue and the light blue. I'll start by clicking on the dark blue in there. Let's go ahead and zoom into this and let's take a look at our mask. Let's see what we're affecting in here. And we can see that we are very well protected from her, so that's great. It looks like it's a bit of noisy. I probably should have done some noise reduction, but oh well. Very much protected her. It has isolated that range of blue, but I want this other blue as well. So I'm just gonna option drag this over, grab that, and now I've got that background area beautifully isolated. Like that worked out really, really well. So now if I go out of the mask view, I can take those control points and I can play with the saturation on those. Now I've got two control points here. So what this means is I can either select one control point and change the saturation. And I'm just gonna go dramatic just for the sake of the demo. I'm gonna go from -24 here, like all the way down. And then I have to go to the other one and I have to take that control point, come here, grab the other one, there it is. And, oh, I had them both selected. That was not my intention. Let's do that again. Let's take that one back up. Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, my confusion. My bad. These control points are affecting the opacity of the entire filter. What I was leading up to, and I totally messed that up, sorry, was some control points, depending on the tool that you're using, have their own individual controls. These do not. So this saturation slider is affecting the entire filter. The only difference between these control points is the opacity of them, if I want to make one of them more or less opaque than another one. Sorry for the confusion there. So in this case, I've got these two control points here. If I want to keep them together so that I know that they're grouped, I can do that. I can select both of those. So if I option shift or command click on both of those, I can select them, or I can select both of them here and I can group them together, and it now treats them as one. In this case, it's actually not necessary, so I'll just ungroup that, but you do have that option if you need it. Okay, moving on. So I've got that area selected. Now let's take the saturation down a little bit more. Yeah, looking pretty good. Take that down a little bit. I don't want to go crazy, right? You can see how black and white it gets. It gets distracting. It's not real. But we'll take it down a little bit more. And looking pretty good. Okay, so I'm good with that. I've taken that down. It's a little bit more isolated. Next thing I'll do is brighten her a little bit. Let's just add a little bit of light onto her. So I'll add another filter. Let's go into levels and curves. Levels and curves, probably under L. There it is. And I'm going to, without even adding anything yet, I'm just going to grab a positive control point, drop it right on her face, and then brighten that up a little bit. So now I've isolated that to her face, and of course, at any time you want to check it, let's zoom in close on here. Let's get a close look on there. We can look at the mask and see exactly what's been affected. It is her face, as I knew it was. So I'm just going to use that to brighten her up a little bit. I don't want to go crazy, just to brighten her up a little bit, just to set her off from that background just a touch. Okay, so we're getting somewhere. I've desaturated the background, I've brightened her, but I feel like the background could still be a little bit darker. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and add yet another filter to this. I'm going to add yet another levels and curves. Levels and curves, there it is, levels and curves. By the way, see the little star in here? Those are for marking your favorites, which I've already done. So I'm going to switch over to my favorites view. So now I'm only looking at a few of them. This will make it a little bit easier to find the filters in the future. Okay, so I've added the extra levels and curves, haven't made any changes yet. I want to apply levels and curves to darken the background, the same area that I've already masked out for the saturation, for the brilliance and warmth, to desaturate the blues. Now, okay, in this image, it's easy. I could just add those couple control points and do it, but let's just say for the sake of an argument that I had spent a lot of time building some really complex masking with a bunch of control points. And now I want to use those same control points on another filter. Well, you have the ability to do that. If I go to the little drop down here on this filter, there's the option to copy control points. So I copy those, and then I go to levels and curves here, and I paste the control points in. Now I've just pasted those same control points from brilliance and warmth over to this levels and curves. And now if I darken this, you'll see that I'm darkening just that background area. So now I'm getting quite a bit more separation. So now we're really seeing that separation on there. Maybe I go back to her face and do I want to brighten her up even more, a little bit in there, looking pretty good. And if we do a little before and after, that is a big, big difference in there. So now I've really isolated her from that background in there. If you were to study the image, you might go, well, that's kind of odd. The background here is a little bit darker than over here. But you know what? No one's going to look at it that closely. No one's going to be trying to figure out what you did to enhance the image. They just go, you know what? The image is better. Let's add a little bit of that same brightness onto the ball up there. So this is my levels and curves that I've added the brightness to. Let's just add another control point, drop it on the basketball up there. I'll make that a little bit smaller and just enhance that out. And I can even do the same thing with the darkening. Let's take the darkening one and darken the background behind that ball a little bit just to make sure that it is even darker. So now it's popping out even more. So again, I compare a before and after. We've got some really nice separation of her and of the ball. All right, let's go ahead and save that. And then I will do a black and white conversion again so we can see the difference there. And then I'm going to jump back into the questions real quick. All right, so there's the original. Let's do a reset on the original. So there's where it started. Wow, that was really dark. There's where it started. If we look at that in black and white, we can see how everything kind of blends together. And we go to the new one and we do the black and white conversion and look at how much more separation there is. Like everything blended there, but here there's a lot more separation. So it makes a big, big difference doing that. And again, that black and white temporary toggle is a great way to preview that. Okay, let me take a quick look at the questions and then we will move on. Jorge is asking, any particular reason why you're using sRGB as your color space? Why not Adobe or ProPhoto? That was not intentional. I was just clicking through quickly. What he's asking is when I, let's grab a photo again. When I sent this photo, go back to color, there we go. When I sent this photo to the plugin, edit in ColorFX Pro, I had not changed my color space. I almost always would. That was just an oversight. I was just moving quickly. I almost always would do that. I'll change it to Adobe RGB. I don't want to get into what the color space differences are, except to say that Adobe RGB is a larger, expanded color space that encompasses more color. However, what is seen on the internet is sRGB. So while this gives you more latitude for working with the color space, this is ultimately what people will see. So I would actually go as far as saying if your intention is purely to share it on screen, then just work in sRGB because then you won't have any unpleasant surprises later. If, however, you're printing or doing more with the image, then you should definitely be in Adobe RGB. Okay, let's see. Let me grab another question before I move on as well. Philip Barker, what is the difference between pro contrast and tonal? Tonal seems more extreme, bit like detail extract. Yeah, I'd have to dig into each one individually. Pro contrast is a little bit larger, a little bit heavy-handed. Yeah, tonal does get into the separation of the highlight, midtones, and shadow tones, if you will. So you do have a little bit more separation in there. Alrighty, so let's move on to the next photo, which is actually going to skip. We're already at 10:40 or 45 after the hour. I'm going to skip this one. I'm going to move into this one next. We're going to get into some of the more creative stuff. So this photo here, let's make sure this is reset. Yes, it is. Okay, cool action photo. We got the skateboarder right in the middle of his jump. Love it. Good framing, good composition. Dig the photo overall. We could do a little bit of auto exposure on here just to brighten it up a touch. Just do that. Great. Okay, cool. The only problem is that he's not really separated from the background. Now, fortunately, because he's wearing red, he does pop from the background, but let's say I want to do a little bit more to it. Okay, so how am I going to do that? Well, I know that there is a really cool bokeh filter in the Analog Effects Pro that will allow me to blur a background and simulate a shallower depth of field. And now just to, to ruin the story here, it's not going to work. But I'm going to try it because it's one of those processes, and I think it's really important to go through the process of exploring and playing and trying different things. And my first thought might be, well, let's see if I can blur the background with the bokeh filter, right? That's what it's all about. So to do that, I'm going to take this photo into Analog Effects Pro because that's where I know the bokeh filter is. Just for my friend, I will go switch this over to Adobe RGB and hit Edit and drop this in there. Now this Analog Effects Pro, I'm not going to spend a bunch of time in here explaining how everything works in here, except to show you that similarly, you have different filters on the right, you have presets on the left, and under the camera's view, you can get to all these different filters that you can add in here. And the filter that I want to add is bokeh. When I click on bokeh here, it replaces everything on the right, and there's my bokeh filter. I can move the focus point around of the image, change the size of that, rotate that, change the blurring from sharp to blurry. Let's just make that a little bigger. There's the rotate. Let's rotate that. And I'm going to position that kind of right over him. And the cool thing about the bokeh filter is it really does do a nice job of making the background look like it's out of focus as opposed to just blurred. There's definitely a difference, especially when you have points of light. And you can even go through here and change the shape of the aperture of your lens. Lenses have different aperture shapes, which will affect the highlight. If you had little spots of light, like Christmas tree lights or something, it would change the shape of that bokeh. Cool, but here it doesn't matter. There's no points of light. This is just about, there it is. Let's go back to the original. This is just about having a blurrier background. And, if he was like a floating orb against the background, then that would probably look pretty good, but it doesn't work. And why doesn't it work? Well, first of all, I don't have clean isolation from his head to the background. Okay, let's say maybe I make this a little bit smaller here. And I can get that a little bit better. His arms are blurry, but you could argue, sure, they're forward and out of the plane of focus, so they're blurry. But now his legs and the background here are blurry to the same degree. And I'm not buying it, right? It's just not right. This is a really, really powerful filter. I think this works well on a lot of types of images, but not this one. So I'm not going to be able to, at least not without some seriously heavy Photoshop work at going in and masking out the separation between the foreground and background here. I'm not going to be able to do the blur very easily. So let's scratch that idea and let's find a different way to do it. So how can we make him separate from the background without blurring it? Well, like with a basketball picture, I can play with the tonal values. I can make the background brighter or darker, maybe more saturated, less saturated. We can play with it along those lines. So let's do that. Let's take this into Color Effects Pro. Let's make sure I'm sending, let's see, that's the TIFF file. I've already generated a TIFF, so we're going to take this into Color Effects Pro, and I will just edit the original because it is a TIFF file. Let's take that into there. And let's work on this one. All right, so the bokeh is no good. What am I going to do about the background? Let's try desaturating it. And I'm going to take a different approach than last time. Instead of using the saturation sliders, I'm going to go for a straight full-on black and white adjustment. Let's see what happens there. So I click on black and white conversion. Obviously, the whole image goes black and white. We will use control points to isolate the foreground from the background. Now this is just a bit kind of too dramatic, and I don't want dramatic in the background. I want the background to go away. I'm not trying to draw attention to it. So I have a couple of different background enhancement versions in here. This is by no means as flexible as going into Color Effects Pro, which is all about black and white. But for simple, quick black and white, I might look at this and go, that's the kind of the most neutral one, that tonal enhancer. Maybe brighten it up a little bit so it's not quite so dark. And actually, no, I'm going to make it darker. I think that's good. And yeah, that's cool. Okay, so that's like the background is now black and white. And maybe I don't like get full on black and white. Let's take the strength down on that a little bit. Maybe we're going to, maybe we'll bring some color back in with the control points. But let's start by just grabbing a control point and adding this to the bowl, if you will. I'm gonna make sure I drop it onto the little, I don't know what these are, the little tree parts that are down there. Just kind of make sure we get those and make that a little bit bigger. And let's take the opacity down a little bit so we're not going full on black and white. We're just doing a heavy desaturation. If that works, let's option drag another one over here. Again, option drag for me is the way to go because my opacity settings has come with it in this case. Drag that over there, make that a little bit bigger. All right, and without making it full on black and white, I have done a nice separation to the background there. Here's a good example of why I might want to group these. Let's take these two here, group them together, and now as I adjust the opacity on this one, it is going to adjust the opacity on both of them. So we'll drop that down to, let's say, right about there. And just because I'm probably hitting him a little bit, let's protect him. Let's add a plus onto him. Ooh, not a plus, sorry, add a minus onto him just to make sure that his face is protected, and we'll even do that on the red just to make sure the red is protected as well. Okay, so now we've got some pretty decent, a little bit better separation going on in there. Let's add a vignette to the whole thing. This brighter area around the edges there is not doing me any favors, so I'll add another filter. I'm going to do a simple lens vignetting on there. Way too strong to begin with, that's okay. Let's just brighten that up a little bit. Maybe make it a little bit smaller and even change the center point. In fact, here, let me do this. Let me make the amount really strong just to kind of show what's happening. If I grab this place center, I'm going to put the center kind of right over his chest. So that's going to get rid of some of that was hitting the top of him there. Maybe a little bit too. Let's just lower it a little bit, like right about so. And now we'll take that vignetting levels down a little bit. So it's not quite so crazy on there. Maybe make it a little bit more rectangular. Playing with it. I'm just really playing with it, trying to find the right level in there, what I think works. And that's all right. Let me make that down a little bit. Actually, you know, the centering is a little bit too off to the edge there. There we go. I think we're getting there. Now it has done this weird thing onto his hand, which is right at the edge of the scene. So let's protect that. Let's grab the negative control point, pop that on his hand in there, and protect his hand. Let's make sure that that is protected from the vignetting. So take the opacity. Yep, there we go. Up to 100. And drop that on the hand. There we go. That's better. So now I've kind of protected his hand from that. So that's a little bit better in there. Maybe we want to brighten his face a little bit. No, let's just add a little bit more punch into his face. So I'll add a filter. Let's look at the levels and curves. Levels and curves. There it is. Let's just take a control point, drop it on his face, and then brighten that up a little bit. Actually, let's add a little contrast. We'll take the shadows down, brighten up a nice little S curve on there, brighten that in. Cool. Maybe onto his shirt as well. All right, we're getting there. So now we're a little before and after. Yeah, you know, we've definitely brought some attention to him, dropped out the background a little bit. It's looking better. It's looking better. All right, last one that I want to do. Let's save this. Last one's going to be getting seriously funky. Let me take a quick look over the questions again. Mark, you said sorry to be late. You will get a copy of this in your inbox 24 hours after this ends, so you will get it. Tatiana has a great question. When you send a photo to Lightroom from Lightroom to Nick, the default res is 240. Does it matter? It does not. The resolution only matters when you go to print. If you have a 1000 by 1000 pixel image and it's set to 10 dpi or 1000 dpi, the only translation to that is when you hit print. When it's on screen, it's still 1000 by 1000 pixels, so the resolution is irrelevant. All right, next photo, last photo is this one here, this snowboarding one. Love this photo. Now, as you might have seen, actually I really didn't play with it a little bit, but some of the photos that I have on here that we're not going to get to, I dig motion blur, right? That's got some good motion blur, got some good motion blur on the wheel, a little bit of motion blur on the wheels in there, some great motion blur in here. I dig motion blur. This photo, love the photo, snowboard is captured midair, but it was a really fast shutter speed, so there is no motion blur. Now clearly he's midair because, you know, he is, but it's lacking any blur. And I feel like this photo, maybe because it's snowboarding, it's like, oh, this could be edgier and kind of crunchier and a bit more fun and cool. So let's have some fun with this. I'm going to move quickly because we are almost out of time. I don't mind going over, but I don't want you guys who have to leave to miss anything. So let me just do a quick little auto enhancement on here where there it is, auto button, little auto enhancement on there. There we go. That's all right. And I'm going to take this one as a smart object into Photoshop, because by taking it as a smart object, I will have a lot more flexibility with what I do with the image when I send it to the filters and bring it back from the filters. And you'll see what I mean in just a moment. This will all make sense momentarily. Let's see, did it open that in Photoshop yet? I guess it's thinking about it. There it is. How did I get a white background on there? There we go. So here we are in Photoshop. It is a smart object, which means I can open this up and go into the raw decode. There's the original raw image with all of the raw decoding. So I could change anything in here that I wanted, but I don't want to do that. I simply want to apply the filter. Now, the advantage of working with, and I'm going to use Analog Effects Pro, by the way. The advantage of using a smart object is when you apply the filter, it becomes a smart filter, which means, as you will see in a moment, that I can go back in and re-edit the filter at any time, which is kind of awesome. All right, I said I like motion blur. There's a bunch of cool, blurry, funky presets in here. I'm gonna grab this one called 33rd Street, which you go, where'd everything go? Well, if I look at my zoom and rotate blur, the center of the blur is way over here. If I position that over my rider here, then suddenly I've got this really cool image. This is kind of awesome. I feel like the blur, the rotation blur is going the wrong direction. So I'm gonna grab this thing here and unwind it and wind it the opposite direction like so. And that is going to push those trees the other way. Now we're getting somewhere. Okay, this, I dig it, right? I love this. He's a little bit too kind of crunchy in there. It's kind of hard to see what's happening. So instead of trying to figure out how to separate him in here, I'm simply going to apply this filter and then brush a mask between the filtered version and the unfiltered version, which because it is a smart filter means that all I have to do is go to the smart filter mask that is already there. I've selected that. Tap B to get my brush tool. I now need to make my mouse size back to normal so I know what size my brush actually is. Take that back to normal, there we go. And I'm going to, let's see, make sure that I have black selected, I do in here, and I'm just gonna paint over him. And now when I do that, you'll see the mask. That's what I've just painted in. It is a total separation between the foreground and the background, but it's a little bit too much. So with that mask layer selected, I'm going to hit Command L to bring up the levels, and I'm going to make that mask just a little bit gray. And you can see the preview here. See how that little icon there is going gray instead of black? Back to there is black, here it's gray. By making a little bit gray, I'm getting some of the filter through, but not all of it. And now that's looking pretty good. I love it. However, if I look at the highlights here, there's some highlights that are totally blown out. Uh-oh, what did I do there? Well, I can go back into the filter, double click on the filter here, it takes me back into the filter. I have all the same control that I had before. Everything that I've done is still here and can still be adjusted. And we'll just let that load. And then I'm going to figure out where that brightness is coming from and knock it back a bit. Easiest way to figure out where something is coming from is to simply toggle each one of the filters on and off until what you're trying to isolate goes away. And in this case, I know it's under the basic adjustment. So it's a little bit too much brightness in there. I'm going to take a control point, add one onto this bright spot and take the brightness of that down a little bit. And as I do that, we'll get a bunch of that color coming back in. Awesome. Let's option drag that over to here. Do the same thing on this spot. Oh yeah, look at that cool color that's coming in there. It's kind of awesome, actually. Let's add another control point right onto him and see, maybe I want to actually brighten him up a little bit. See how that works out for me. Yeah, look at that. Oh, that's kind of cool. All right, doing good there. I'm digging it. Let's take this down just a little bit more. Make that a little bit darker in there. Hit OK on there. It's going to combine back with the masking that I had already done, so I haven't lost any of that. This image at this point is 100% editable. I can even go back to the raw source and edit it and still get the effects all cascading through. And in this case, I end up with something that I think is kind of cool. So that is everything I wanted to show you today. Let's jump back into the questions real quick and see what else is going on. All right. Sandy Creed, how do you control how many control points? You just keep on adding as many as you want. I've been asked if there's a limit. I don't know if there's a limit. I've never run into a limit, and I have done images where I've added, I would say, even over 100 control points before. So I don't think that there is a limit. I suppose at some point your computer might start slowing down, but yeah, I've never run into a limit. So you can, to delete a control point, you simply select it and hit delete. So let me go back into this. Let's say that I wanted to get rid of one of these control points. All I got to do is select it and delete it. Ray Nichols, can you draw a marquee around control points to group them and then add an outlier control point to the group by holding down shift click and adding to it? Okay, I got you. Yes, so let me show you first of all the basic adjustments. We were looking at these 3 control points that I added. So if I wanted to get rid of any one of these, I would simply come back here. I would simply select the one that I wanted to get rid of and I just hit the delete key, boom, and it's gone. Or I'll undo that. There's also a delete button down here, so that's one way to do that. The other, let's see, Ray had asked about selecting multiple. So we should be seeing all 3 of these. So there's multiple ways to select these. I can click on here to select it. I can just simply click on it to select it. Or if I just click and drag over them, I can select all of them. So I've selected all of those. I now group them. Okay, great. Now, this is not working in this case for the effect because now all of them have the same effect applied, which is not what I wanted, but this is for the sake of answering Ray's question. So all three of these have been added. So now if I go, let's say if I take the brightness down on this one, that has affected the brightness on all of these. Now what he's asking is, can I add another one into it? So let's say that I add another control point. I go, okay, I want a control point here and I want to add that to the group. If I select both of these, so the group and that control point, and I hit group again, it just adds that one to the group. And now this one gets added with everything else. And so that control point will adjust all of those. So that is how that works. All right. I see it is now on the hour, so anybody who has to go, thank you so much for tuning in. Again, make sure you follow me on Twitter at PhotoJoseph. Again, I put the links in. In fact, let's just do that one more time into the chat. There it is. There's links to my Twitter and to my YouTube. I would lovely appreciate a follow everywhere. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up on Twitter. That's the best place for that. For those of you who don't have to run, I will continue to go through and answer the rest of these questions. All righty, Vicky, how did I get rid of the brush button? It always messes up my workflow. Oh, the brush button is gone because I'm working with a smart object. If you were not in a smart object, the brush button would be there. So you don't get rid of it, you can just ignore it, but that brush button allows you to brush the effect in the same way that I did with the mask between the smart object and the smart filter. However, it is a permanent effect once you apply it. So this gives you a lot more flexibility. Rafael says, in yesterday's webinar, I didn't know there was one yesterday, not mine. In yesterday's webinar, I got what I think is a great idea. You can propose it to DxO designers. Okay, I think it would be very useful if control point mask could be selected as a lasso tool in Photoshop instead of being a circle, or at least have the option to configure it if you want to mask as a circle. So I have a lot of suggestions in regards to how control points work. All I can tell you is that DxO is very interested in furthering the development of these plugins, and I think that you are going to see a lot of improvements coming in the future. Your idea is not the first time I've heard that, and I have proposed similar things to DxO. So I'm hoping that some of my ideas and your ideas and a lot of these really great ideas that we've had will make their way into the software. The software hasn't fundamentally changed since it was originally developed, which some of these are about 15 years old in their original concepts. So there is definitely some room for evolution here, and I think we're going to start seeing, I know we're going to start seeing some of that. All right, Philip saying, thank you, you are quite welcome. Everybody's saying fantastic webinar, you are most welcome, appreciate that. Let's see, and that's it, everybody, wow, right on. That answers the end of the questions, only 2 minutes past this time. Thanks a bunch for tuning in, everybody. Again, you'll get a copy of this webinar in your inbox in 24 hours. And once again, if you haven't subscribed to me on YouTube and Twitter, I would most certainly appreciate that. Otherwise, I will see you next Thursday. I've got another one of these. I have no idea what the session is. We'll figure it out between now and then. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.